so it's after the hour now, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm sure we're going to have a few more people breaking in. Moderators, if you can help watch that the participants in the waiting room. So for those who don't know me, I'm Chris Mesa, one of the Ldsig board members, and want to welcome you to our first What Did You Make? We have a couple veteran model railroaders here. Richard Steven and Lloyd Lerner are going to share about their layout and some of the interesting design elements they put in there to solve some of the challenges they had. Unfortunately, our third review is recovering from shoulder surgery this week, so he's not going to be able to make it. So, but I think we'll have plenty of content, and I did want to have some open mic session because we had several questions that we wanted to pose out there. Before we get started, I wanted to do a public service message. First of all, many of you probably got an email saying that you had expired memberships. Unfortunately, if you looked in our IO group, there was a message sent out by John explaining some of it, but we had a hiccup in our email server that kind of tied two messages together. So that's, I would say, if you got that message and you think you're not expired, and if you probably got this invite if you were good. So you might have, you likely got a message in error. Please reach out if you have any questions. We have a board meeting tomorrow, and we'll discuss how we need to put out any more information. But I want to apologize for that mix up, but the email that got kind of blended two messages together about the reminder for this and a group and the expiration of membership. So sorry about that. That's what happened there. We're going to ask you, I'm going to ask you here in a second to everybody go ahead and mute yourselves during the presentation time. Our presenters will be going over kind of an overview of their layout. We'll take a stop there. Please put your questions into chat, and we'll queue those up at the break, and then we'll do another question and answer after they're done, explaining the more detailed aspect of the work they've done. So I'd like to ask everybody to go ahead and mute themselves, other than you, Richard. We'll start with Richard Steven. I'll let him introduce himself, and let me get you, because I want to highlight you, Richard. Spotlight for everyone. And
hello, I'm Rich Steven. I've lived in Chicago most of my life, and now I live in Island Lake, which is a far northwest suburb of Chicago. So I grew up seeing trains running transfers between yards and seeing a lot of switching. So that's really what I model. So if you want to go to the little video, we can see how I've tried to incorporate Chicago.
Give me 1 second to share that out.
This is the beginning of the Belt Railway of Chicago. We have the steel mill in the background, and on the left you have the
Whoops.
Let me make sure I got the sound on. Okay.
This is the beginning of
You've
the
actually
Beltway
taken
of
that off the
Chicago. We
screen
have
we're
the
viewing.
steel mill in the
I'm not seeing
background.
it.
And
You're
on
not
the
sharing
left,
it,
you
showing it on
have
different
the
screen.
steel yard, which is just 4 tracks wide.
All right. Showed me the wrong
And
screen.
this is
See it
the
now?
Sand Mine
Yeah.
International.
One second. I'm trying to see why sound is not coming through.
It's coming through on our end. It was playing.
Okay. There. Then.
This is the beginning of the Belt Railway of Chicago. We have the steel mill in the background. And on the left, you have the steel yard, which is just 4 tracks wide. And this is the Sand Mine International Sand and Minerals. And to the right is the big B Cruiser yard. This is the glass plant. If it's going to be built yet, this is just a rough in. And this is where the incoming sand and sodium carbonate for the glass plant land. This is a stand-in for the tallow plant. To the left is the small industrial yard to support the glass plant and the tallow rendering facility. And also on the right is the Belt Railway of Chicago car shop, which is another destination on. This is where the Belt Railway of Chicago ends and the Illinois Northern picks up in the Grand Trunk yard called Ldsig, which is on the south side of Chicago. In the foreground you have tracks that represent other railroads, so cars are switched to that. That's my form of staging. And then in the middle of the yard is the outbound yard for trains, to cars to be classed for trains going to various switch jobs or to other yards. This is the Ldsig industrial area. There's a number of facilities back here to be switched. This is Illinois Northern's 33rd Street yard. In the real world, it was a small interchange yard, but here it's used to sort cars for the subsequent paper mill and brewery facilities. The other end of 33rd Street yard, here's the paper mill. There's the distribution side of the paper mill. There are 5 implied industries along the wall here that all get switched, and the extra track there along the wall is just for off spot. That's the brewery complex right there. Next is why the Illinois Northern continues off to the right there. To the left is Chicago Junction. This is 26th Street yard where the Illinois Northern terminates. And there are a few industries here to the left that are switched by the 26th Street operator. That's the Chicago Junction Freight House. That the original had 26 tracks. I have 4, selective compression. And this is Chicago Junction's Roby Street yard, which was originally used as a float yard, and the Erie Railroad leased space. There's the car float over there. Illinois Northern connected here, but that's as much involvement as it had with it. These are the interchange tracks of the Ashland Avenue yard. The real Ashland Avenue yard has 26 tracks. This yard has 16 on those interchange tracks and another 10 on the... These are the outbound tracks for the Chicago Junction Ashland Avenue yard, along with the engine terminal in the foreground. In the background is the Loomis Avenue yard, which today is 4 tracks, and this is 4 tracks. And also in the foreground here you have Vantage Chemicals, which is the only remaining industry in the area of the Chicago Union Stockyards. This is the Chicago Central Manufacturing District. This was an area just south of Ashland Avenue Yard in Chicago. There's a little bit of trackage left there in the ground, but not much. I think there's one industry over there in today's world. But at one time, this was a busy industrial area. This is my rendition of Iron Avenue, which really didn't look like that, but it gets me over to the Central Manufacturing District and to the next area, which is International Harvester. In my world, International Harvester makes cars only because I couldn't get enough models of tractors to make it work, to show tractors around. I've got a few trucks in that, but this is the other area of Harvester. That's the layout.
Okay, that's the layout tour. Did you want to put up the slide of the layout plan?
Yes, I'll put that up. If you have any questions overall about the layout, go ahead and start putting those into the. You're getting the wrong screen right now,
Yeah, we need the next one, the next slide.
but are you seeing two slides right now?
Yeah,
Okay. It's tell it's a duplicate. It's putting it on the wrong.
there we go. Where'd I get the excellent backdrops? I got them at the local hobby shop, Ron's Hobbies. They're called realistic backgrounds. I probably have all of them or very close to it. They are nice. The different colors you see on the layout diagram represent different switching jobs. And you'll see that's how I sort cars in my yards. For the switch jobs, I use colors I have individual lines for each destination for the car. A car can go to any number of destinations depending on the type of car. Can you get full screen? Or is that?
That's full screen. Are you getting the top chopped off? You should be full screen.
Okay, I'm seeing your menu bar in front of everything. I don't know if everybody else is.
Yes, we are.
Okay, let me take it out of.
The vagaries of Zoom.
The second my mouse is not cooperating with me. Okay.
Yeah, these are just some overall pictures of an operating session. I've had up to 13 people here operating. It was a lot of fun. Everybody was busy.
You hate
Usually when I have less than that, what we do is we operate different jobs. You finish one job, okay, what needs to be done next? You look at where cars are gathering for a train and go do that job next. But when you had 13 people here, stuff just flowed.
Okay, just sorry about that. I had a little technical difficulty there. Um, Okay, you see him without the bar now?
Or still there.
Yeah, it's right across the middle of the picture. There you go. Now it's at the bottom. That's better.
Much better.
Okay, what slide do you like me to go to?
Go to the next one. This is the area where I threw the double slip switch to improve the fluidity of the yard. It's the second switch at the top right there that comes in. It's a double slip switch, so it allows me to continue switching on the ladder while another train is entering or leaving on the arrival departure track. I have two of them, but the one closest to the wall is my main arrival departure track. So they can be independent things going on, which really helps. You can go to the next slide if you want. Just pictures from operating session. These are panoramic pictures. So this is the Belt Railway of Chicago in front of you. I built that, what you see on the screen there with the plywood Pacific was done in 2 weeks. And I'm going to let it sit for a while and operate it for a while to see that everything works, or if there's something I want to change, it's easier to change now than after ballast and scenery is in. Next slide.
Ballast and scenery? Oh, ballast.
And this is the other area that it was built like last year, the plywood portion. Everything else has scenery except what's on that bridge, which was a lift out bridge, but is now it's just permanent. It's a duck under. Next slide. Elsdon Avenue Yard on the right, 33rd Street on the left. And that's Art. He loves to operate the 33rd Street Yard. It's usually where you find him. Next slide. And on this side of the wall, see 33rd Street is just on the right edge of the picture. On the left, that's the paper mill and brewery job. Next slide. And this is overhead looking at 26th Street Yard operator with the red shirt on. And up front, you see the Y where Illinois Northern curves off to the right. Next slide. There's the Ashland Avenue yard. The way I do my staging is each of these tracks acts as an interchange to another railroad. And then we pull cars off the back end of the tracks as the tracks fill up, and then those get sorted for their next destination. I don't know if I included a picture of my car cards, but I can show you one after these slides so you can see why I have the colors. Next slide. This is the outbound yard of Ashland Avenue Yard. There's 10 tracks in there. There's a good size engine terminal, store engines. Next slide. There's Loomis Avenue Yard and Vantage Chemicals up front. Next slide. The next slide is a better picture of Vantage Chemical. It kind of catches the taste and feel of the real Vantage Chemical. It's certainly not exact, but close enough to give you that feeling. Next slide. And then the next few slides are pictures of the Chicago Central Manufacturing District, which was the first industrial park in the country. Next slide. It's where all the others got the idea from. Next slide. So the deal with the Chicago Central Manufacturing District was you bought a piece of property, they built a building for you, and you had a specific time of day that you would get a switch for a car, either in or out, or both. Next slide. It's just another shot of Central Manufacturing District.
Yeah.
Kind of a challenge putting that road in. It's play tape for kids. And sometimes it comes up and I got to put a new piece down, but it's okay. Next slide. And this is International Harvester. Next slide. Another shot of International Harvester. Next slide. And the last shot of International Harvester. And then I have another section of the layout that sometimes I use if I have enough operators. Next slide. It's the other end of the float yard. So I call this North Pier Terminal. Back in the day, they actually did run car floats to North Pier Terminal, but they didn't take the cars off the float there. They just unloaded cars from it. It was right on the lakefront. They did have two other float yards. The Erie did. Webster Avenue was the larger of the two, and another one was at Erie and Kingsbury Streets, and they interchanged with the Milwaukee there. I think that's it. That's all I got for slides. Let's see if I can rotate my camera around. This is a picture of one of my car cards. So you can see from the layout diagram, they had different colors. So when you're sorting in a yard, you can sort real easily by color. Like if you had all yellows, that's going to be going to Ldsig. And in this case, the next location that has nothing written in it here is to be interchanged with the Illinois Central. So there's one track designated in Illinois Central at Ldsig, and that's where it would go. And you just put in the time that the car was put there. Generally speaking, on the layout, anything that is spotted has to stay for 2 hours before it can be picked up, which usually ends up in the next session. So you won't pick it up again. So that's that. I put a picture of the cars on there too, just an N scale. Some people complain they can't read, but I think you can read almost every number. The only cars I have trouble with are the flat cars, which you do in HO scale as well. If I don't weather too heavily. So if it looks like that car, it's probably it. And don't worry about it if it isn't. Close enough. Okay, I guess I'll go on to what I actually did here. There's the double slip switch. Generally, I don't like a double slip switch on a yard throat because they tend to be derailment causers. But just one by itself seems to work okay. I don't really have a problem. I used to have in my Ldsig yard, used to have on half of the yard 2 single slip and 2 double slip switches, and things were derailing in that all the time. But that may have been due to using pizza cutter wheels, with the deep flanges. I think they were bouncing up on the frogs, and that's what the problem really was. I just recently went on an escapade to change all the wheels out to low profile. The other thing I wanted to show you, this lift out bridge here. I put hinges on both sides so I could, because I wasn't sure which end I wanted to lift it from. So I said, well, I'll just put them on both ends. Well, someone pointed out that the fulcrum point is too low here and that it would damage the track. Well, I was lifting out this way and I noticed when I was doing that this piece of track here was actually moving. So that wasn't going to last long that way. So I added a spacer underneath the hinges on both sides. And that brought up the fulcrum point to a point that it no longer touches when you pick up the bridge.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. This
Okay,
guy has such a Chicago twang. It's hard to listen to him.
I get it.
Wow.
Somebody's talking and not on mute.
Like listening to JC.
yeah,
Bob Oliver?
okay. That's, unless you want, there's something specific you want to see, that's kind of the whole deal. That's what I had planned.
Thanks, Rick. There was a few questions in the, I think you answered one of them already. There's everybody was asking about, you are modeling an N scale, right? But I think you answered that one. What are the dimensions? And is that a garage that you're in?
Yes, it's a garage. It's 20 by 22. And I use pretty much the whole garage. I saw somebody ask, did I use metal or plastic wheels? Plastic wheels. Because ironically, I found out that the metal wheels, I was getting more derailment problems from those than from plastic wheels. So if I had metal wheels on something, generally I replace it with plastic because they seem to be fine. That's just my experience. I'm not saying it's right or wrong.
Well, it's hard to argue with experience.
I'm kind of a contra guy, contra to, you know, what everybody says, like, oh, cleaning tracks. Oh, yeah, you got to clean tracks. I used these graphite sticks and you rub that on the rails before a session. Don't do it with the power on. The graphite stick gets hot. Ask me how I know. But the graphite seems to take care of micro arcing, which is really the problem for DCC. And then I don't have a problem with the train stalling, the sounds restarting, at least not as much. So it works better than using an abrasive. I've tried wall clipper oil, rail zip, number of things. This has been the best thing I've used yet.
I think, Seth, your question is how, I think it's how far from the aisle to the double slip is it? I think that's supposed to be a far.
Oh, it actually is pretty close. Just right now, there's a garbage can here, but you can get to that. That's probably a foot away from the aisle. So it's an easy reach. There's only one spot on the layout that is more than 2 feet, and that's in the Ashland Avenue yard where typically not much should be going on except cars are moving in a straight line. So I don't have too much problem. In fact, I had more I just had new siding put on the house due to hail damage. When the guys were putting the siding in, one of my paintings popped off the wall, landed on top of Ashland Avenue yard, derailing a bunch of cars and knocking wheels off. And so that was a minor project to put everything back. But yeah, there's only one corner of Ashland Avenue yard that I have to get up on a ladder to get in there to reach it.
Let's see, questions here. Does your layout stay static in between operating sessions? Or do you reset up?
I don't reset up. No, it's it can stay as it is. I've been known to wake up extra early in the morning and do some switching for 10-15 minutes before I go to work. So something typically happens on the layout every day.
So
But-
it's always in an operating state.
Yeah, it can operate all the time, continuous. I don't have to stop to restage.
I have a question about prototype operation. What were the sources of information that you used to flesh out your operating scheme, and what documents do the various jobs positions use? aside from the waybills you just shared?
From a variety of sources, mostly online. I found stuff on the stockyards that was, like for instance, the stockyards. People think that all the animals went there to be slaughtered. That's not true. Typically 10,000 cars came in and 7,000 went out to continue further east.
Hmm.
They basically use it as a huge feed and watering stop. So they would unload the animals, feed and water them overnight, and the next day they would load up and continue on out east. Illinois Northern, there was an article actually in I can't think of the name of it right now, but it was the Santa Fe Historical Society publication. And they had an interesting article about the Illinois Northern. It used to belong to, it started out as Santa Fe's main line into Chicago. Chicago wouldn't let them get in downtown. So they had to actually terminate at 26th and Western, which is about where the Illinois Northern ended. And then people would have to take a stagecoach into the city, like a 15-minute stagecoach ride. After a couple of years, Santa Fe negotiated a agreement with the Grand Trunk to go through Ldsig Yard, because Grand Trunk was able to get into Chicago. And then a couple of years later, Santa Fe actually got their own entrance into Chicago. Guess that means paying off your right alderman or something. That's
Right.
but at one point, Illinois Northern provided 10,000 carloads a month to the Santa Fe, which was a good chunk of their business. And it was just a 6-mile line. Now it's being converted to a bike and walking trail. International Harvester had a big plant located on the Illinois Northern. In my world, I'm putting it at the end of Chicago Junction, just because it didn't fit where I originally put it, which was at 26th Street. As far as Central Manufacturing District, I found that online. And it was, there was even a book about it that I found, written in the flowery language of real estate promoters. And my yard in the Beltway of Chicago and the steel mill is all freelance. There was a rolling mill type of operation off of across from the Central Manufacturing District, across the South Fork of the South Branch of the Chicago River. And the glass is totally made up. That's because of my wife's hometown. There's Streeter, Illinois. There was a couple glass plants there, so I had a model glass. So it's a proto freelance operation. If you look at some old drawings of some of the trackage in Chicago, I actually had a complaint. Someone said your layout's too tracky. Well, then I show them this picture and say, well, this was Chicago. Look at all those tracks.
Yeah.
It's all yards. And I remember as a little boy being in a building like up where this magnet is and overlooking that. And I said, someday I'm going to have that. And here we are.
What examples of operating paperwork do you use besides your waybills with the colors and the time slots on them?
Oh, I just use the waybills. That's it. It's, your train crew really only needs to know, where's this car going and when can I get it? When can I pick it up? So it's reduced to that. It's all switching all the time. The only runs, if you want to call them that, of trains are transfers between yards, which I have enough of that I usually have to dedicate at least one person, if not two, to just run on transfer trains, because it takes a while to get across the railroad, because you have to negotiate by all the switch trains that are out there working.
I like your innovation of having a dwell time of 2 hours. How does that go over with your crews? Do they pay any attention? And do you have any protected spot times, like for LCL or any other shippers or receivers?
Yeah, I do. The exceptions are, let me think. Over at the brewery, there's I saw that there was a grain silo there. I prefer to keep that to 1 hour, to unload it, or 3 and out. We're really putting a lot of cars through there, and say, okay, they're using a car vibrator to make the cars empty faster, so you can put 3 an hour through there. And it's not a fast time clock, because with switching, you can't speed things up. In fact, my clock, if anything, is a little slow time. I think an hour passes an hour and 5 minutes, and nobody complains because they need the extra time. Where else do I have a quick turnaround? Trying to think. Oh, and the steel mill, I have a different method there. I use kind of job orders on little index cards that tells you what the next step is. What is, so typically you start out with, you pick up a car of scrap from the scrap yard and take it over here. This is where they do the scrap sorting, because it's a mini mill where they're just melting down scrap to make other things. And then there's a sequence of, you take this car and put it here, then you take then a different car in another area, move it. By the time you go through the whole sequence, you've killed some time, and then it's time to start over, as long as you have cars, available in your yard. So that makes for a lot of inflow and outflow traffic from the steel yard to the BRC yard. So that's kept things busy. Also with the glass plant, bringing in the carloads of sand. It wouldn't take too long to unload carloads of sand. So the sequence there, it's also got a index card list of steps to take. Take one car from here, put it in the sand spot, pick up the car that's there, put it back in the yard for an outbound. And then it tells you whatever the next thing is. If there's no car available for that particular operation, skip it and go to the next card. So this last session I had where somebody worked the glass plant, it kept them busy the entire session. And the same thing with the steel mill. Somebody was busy over there. It's like its own little railroad right there. So other than that, everything is more sporadically, as far as sightings, industrial sightings, more sporadically switched. Typically, at least every other session, something gets switched, a particular sighting. I've got over 700 cars on the layout. There's 354, I believe, switches. And I got about 60 locomotives. So with N scale, you always got to have extra locomotives, because all of a sudden something craps out, just stops responding for some reason. You have another locomotive, keep going.
So Rick, got time for one more question that's out there, and that's what error are you modeling, and is there a stockyard in your plan?
The stockyard is a picture only. I've got bring you over here. I found a picture, a place online that would send me a picture. There's a picture of the Chicago stockyards. The era is rather loose. It's sometime between 1960 and 2000. So I can use a variety of equipment. So I have wood-sided boxcars, iced reefers, along with mechanical reefers, because when I was growing up, that's what I was seeing. I saw all these things rolling. So that's, you model what you grew up with.
All right, great, Rick. Thank you very much. If anybody has any other questions, we can get them to Rick offline. You can go ahead and put them into the chat box. But need to go ahead and move on to the next one. Really appreciate your time, Rick.
By the way, I'm always looking for operators. So if you want to operate, drop me a line.
I got to figure out the next time I'm that way. Okay. Before we go ahead and start with Lloyd, couple administrative things wanted to go over. We got the national convention coming up here soon. One, we're looking for a couple things from the SIG room. Let me change this 1 second. We'll have the SIG room set up there. One, we're actually looking for people who want to help both staff the desk, do consultations, or those who need who want to get consultation, bring your Givens and Druthers, whatever dimensions, whatever you've already worked out and have, and the questions that you have, and come ready. Typically those sessions fill up, so always get to the SIG room early and get signed up for those. Seth, anything else you wanted to mention on the SIG room?
I think that's it. I just wanted again to remind people on this call who are going to St. Louis that we do have consulting services and we do have display space. So we'd like very much for you to bring your design and talk to people.
Yeah. Seth mentioned kind of the other thing that I forgot to say, and that is you have poster displays or anything else that you would like to bring in. We've had people bring in mock-up models of their three-dimensional, but anything you want to bring in, let us know. I'll put contact any of the board members, and I'll put here in this chat in a couple minutes our general email that you can send to also if you have questions. Travers, you had a couple.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. One of the projects that we're undertaking is an update of the Ldsig primer. You guys can find that online in the on the Ldsig website. And Dave Lull is heading up that project, and he might say a word or two. Dave, are you there?
I'm here. Currently, what we're trying to do is look for people that want to write, want to review some of the pieces. I suggest look through the SIG pages, and you'll find a page with kind of an index of all kinds of topics and things. See if there's anything there you might be interested in. My email's not on there, so I don't know how exactly you contact. Maybe Travers knows more about that.
We'll get it on there, Dave.
Okay.
We'll get a redirected email on there. We don't like to put your personal email up on website.
Okay. Yeah,
but we'll put a redirected one.
Sounds good. But don't be afraid to just write to me and ask me questions and whatever, and we can discuss that.
And what the primer is a series of articles about layout design topics. And it was originally written some 20, 25 years ago, and some of them have been updated in the interim. But we've taken on a project to try and update that and to help both new and experienced layout designers review some issues with respect to the topics that are listed there. Could be anything from why do you want to make a layout, or to helixes to any number of layout design issues. And Chris, did you want to say anything about needing some IT help for the Bluehost changes?
Yeah, so we've lost one of the people who was helping us on the web page management. We have some changes we're going to need to put in place. One, as the primer changes, and two, we'd like to actually enhance the way you can acquire back issues. So if there's anyone who has capabilities in that area, appreciate it. You can go ahead and reach out to me. Again, I'll put that email on my in the chat here in a minute since we start the next session. All right, without further ado, I want to hand it over to Lloyd Lerner. He's going to talk about some of the things he has done on his layout, particularly the aluminum sliding access and his no-lift implementation that he has on that. But I think he's going to go ahead and start off with an overview of his layout. Lloyd, it's all yours. I think you're going to do the sharing of this one. Can't hear you right now, Lloyd. You're muted. You're still muted. Oh, you're not muted, but you're. Can anybody else hear Lloyd?
Oh,
No, I think you're muted on your headset instead of on Zoom or something like that.
We were hearing him before. Still can't hear you, Lloyd.
How about now?
Yeah, I got you.
All right, good. Oh, I'd switched my headset off for a minute. I had to go be interrupted with a call. All right. Sorry about that. It dawned on me I did that. All right, so now we're going to share screen here. Okay, you should be seeing my screen. You could ignore that pretty picture, but that is my turntable in Alta.
You got it.
And let's get going here. Okay. All right, you should be seeing a picture of a harbor scene with a lot of crap laying all over the water. If there anybody who isn't, let me know. And we're gonna just work our way through. I'm an HON3 modeler. I've been in this hobby since I was 7, when my dad bought me a lovely 027 layout and fixed it up so I didn't even have to get out of bed to play with my trains. I could just lower it down. It was hinged on the wall. Anyway, my parents tell me I was actually into trains when I was an infant because my crib had a window that overlooked the SP yard in East Los Angeles. And I could actually see the switchers switching around, and I can remember them from as I got older doing that. All right, so this is an 11.5 by 22 foot room. It's a double deck layout, HON3. It does have some standard gauge on it, like the track you're seeing right there on the pier is actually all standard gauge cars. I do have dual gauge on the layout. If you walked in the door and you turned to the left, you were looking down this aisle, and that's all dual gauge track down there that you're looking at. The dual gauge continues around this side. And I apologize for all the mess everywhere. When I took this, which was like a week ago, I was in the middle of a major redo of a particular section. And of course, I have no place but the floor and the layout to put crap on because I filled it all with layout. So this is the end of that aisle. This is coming back around to your right. You can see some area there that's waiting for a kit yet to be built. It will be to the left of this one. And the water's all been redone, which is part of what the major project entailed. So it doesn't look like this anymore. It actually looks like water. There's the section I was working on. I threw some ships back in the water so it wouldn't look too silly. And now we're coming back up to the end of the aisle, and this is a long peninsula that comes around down the middle of the room. There's my that wharf there happens to be a Starbucks stir stick special. They're my favorite supplier of hardwood. That's it down there in the lower left. And what you're looking at is the lower level and the transition on the Nolix about halfway up, which is the curved trestle. Anyway, we're now going to go back to the back aisle, and oh, there's a close-up look of that scene. And now we're heading around. A lot of Bragdon foam scenery. I love his rock casting materials. They're just wonderful. And this is a look down the back aisle. And we'll head into that aisle. We'll get to that steel trestle later. Okay, this is the very back of the aisle. I'm a geologist by training, and even though that isn't what I did most of my life. And I'm a soft rock geologist, so you have to have stratigraphy. And we're now coming around the corner. This is a small town of Ldsig. You'll see up there, this is on the mid-level. This is my honorary section here where I have done a bump out on my Nolix, just so I can tell Providenza that I have one. Now we're coming back on that aisle. We're back to the center section. On the lower level, we're getting to my 3-track yard. Remember, this is all narrow gauge, so it doesn't take a whole lot. My yard will hold 35 to 40 cars, depending on whether or not they're Blackstone's cars or other people's slightly larger cars. This is a smelter complex that's down here. And it comes across the river to turntable and roundhouse, which is down here on the lower level in the corner. If you go another, there you go. You're actually looking out through the doorway there where we came in. And now we're going to go to the upper level. Now we're back standing in the doorway, looking to the left again. Takes you into the mining district. Incidentally, there was an earthquake that shut off the water that they were using for the mine, which is why they had to build the smelter down below at the river. They have no way to process anything up here. All they can do is run it through the grizzly. They can't even run it through the ball mill or the stamp mills because they need some water. And coming around the end, small industry, a small town called Glory, and then into a fill area. They did have, along with the gold mine, some petroleum here. And now you're looking at the end of the upper level, at the end of the peninsula, which is my town of Alta. And now we're going to go back. We're walking now to the back aisle again. But since you saw everything on the upper already, we're just going to kind of work our way around here. We're coming back around towards the doorway. This is just a small watering hole for our fearless cattle, our soon-to-be hamburger. This is a little section area that supports the upper level. Okay, and we are done. Now that was fast and furious because my other presentations will take a little bit longer. So if there's any questions on what you saw on the layout, that's great. This is the time to get them out there. Any questions, or can I move right along? I'm not hearing anything.
So I'd proceed then, Doug, or
All right, good.
Lloyd?
Yeah.
This is Bill Neal. How do you throw your turnouts? I didn't notice a switch machine on each turnout. How do you do it?
Okay, on the lower level, they're all hand throws. And on the upper level, they're all tortoises.
Okay, thank you. I saw a
Uh,
mixture of stuff, and I wondered if there was an inconsistent approach there.
yeah, well, that's as consistent as it gets. I'm not a terribly consistent person.
I understand. Not a problem.
All my layout is mythical. It represents a coastal town, Central California. The ships actually go out to the islands. The islands actually are more like Catalina. There's a lot of industry needed to support the islands, but no space. So all the industry to support them is gets on a ship and gets shipped over there.
Okay.
So that's it there. Now let me see here. I've got to get to here. All right. Shut this off. Okay, so what you're looking at here is a Nolix. There's a little bit of sound in the background, but you'd have to really crank it up to be able to hear it. It's
I
not
don't see
really-
it coming through yet. Is anybody else?
No, it's not.
we're just seeing.
Oh, sorry. I
face.
switched off of share to get over here. Now I got to go back into share. Okay. All right. You see it?
Yeah, it's there now.
Okay. I did do these in vertical with my phone, so they're all going to be kind of cropped in. Hopefully that's full screen as necessary on my end. All right. So basically, let's just chat for a minute about Nolixes. An Nolix is a way to get from one level to another level without going through a helix. And that's it. It's a little more complicated than that in terms of the design elements, but I'm just going to show you, the only place I would have had in this room to put a helix would have compromised about roughly a 20th of my space, and I wasn't willing to give that up. So the only choice was a Nolix. My Nolix is going up 18 inches from the lower level to the upper level, and it simply climbs along. Because I'm running narrow gauge and I like the challenge, I'm running somewhere between 3 and 3.5%. In most of it, there's a couple of spots where it actually gets a little steeper. So we're just going to crank it on up, and we'll talk about a few things here. This whole thing is going to take roughly 2.5 minutes. Okay. What you're seeing right here is the line is coming up the hill. We're already at the first turnout, which happens to be a line that comes into the turntable. So if necessary, I can turn stuff on the lower level and send it back up the hill. And you get some idea. You can see from the pilings here, I'm coming up. This is still 0 elevation here. We're already up 3 inches. And we're running along behind the smelter. And by the time you get up here to this corner, you're already up right there. You're at 5 inches. We've just turned the corner, and now we're running along the 22-foot wall. We're going to run behind to the bottom of my upper level long desert trestle. And now you're running into my little herniated helix, or excuse me, herniated nolix. And then you're already up on the back wall, and you can see you only have to go from here to here. Yet to go. We're coming across steel trestle, and I want to point out a couple of things here on the steel trestle. You'll notice the trestle goes up and then comes down a little bit and then goes back up. That's on purpose. That's in case you get a runaway. It gives you a nice long place for it to slow down and you can catch it. We won't talk about runaways on helixes because you deserve what you get. As I said, this is fast and furious here. And up here, we're going to go through a tunnel and come out on the other side of the peninsula. And then we're going to keep running along this grade. You can just see the difference in the grades here showing in the levels. Okay, we're almost at the top now. Incidentally, if any of you are going to be in Tacoma, I do a clinic on making these trees. And right here, you literally arrive at the upper level. The upper level is totally flat, except for the switchbacks into the logging and one little siding track that runs around in the around the mine, and that's it. Now, personally, I don't see why anybody would build a helix if they had the room to build a nolix, and it takes less room to build a nolix than it does to build a helix because it's all running room, so it's all part of your layout. You can put your industries anywhere you want along the line, put sidings anywhere you want along the line, and that's the end of my argument for why you should have a nolix instead of a helix. Okay. Now I'm going to get back. Is there a passing track on the nolix? Yes, there's a passing track in the herniated bump out. Well, actually, there's one below that. There's one right behind the smelter, which is not intended to be a passing track, but it can be. It's actually a little short. There is a passing track going through the slaughterhouse facility that was on the herniated part of the Nolix, and then when you get all the way up, let's see. No, that's it. There are no more passing tracks. I could have put one in, but it doesn't take that long to run from one end to the other. And once you get onto the upper level, there are two large passing tracks. One immediately when you get to the top of the upper level, and one all the way around on the other side of the upper level, over towards the cattle. And there's also one over at the oil crude fill just before you get to Alta. So there's plenty of places to run around on each of the levels. Do I have an operating plan? I use car cards and waybill. It's narrow gauge, it's single track. So I send people out on a mine run. I send people out on a logging run. I send people out on the crude run where they have to bring a string of empties up and bring the crude back down to the distributor on the lower level. The whole concept here is you have traffic on through the pier, you have traffic up the hill, and you have traffic on the lower level. There are actually 49 industries on my layout, places to drop a car with assignments to those cars, to those spots. You can spend theoretically 4 hours just working 2 or 3 runs. If you're just running a peddler, that's a 2.5 to 3 hour run, depending on how many cars are already out there waiting for you. I try and run K27s up the hill, and usually my trains are short enough. My oil fill only takes 5 cars. My cattle siding takes 6. The mine holds 6. So I usually don't need a helper, but when I do, I'll just throw a C on the front, or we'll double up on the Ks and run them up the hill. It's a lot of fun.
Lloyd, there's a couple questions that were up higher about the kind of couplers you're using.
I'm using Katie 714s and 713s. I don't like the bounce, but I like the fact that they're easy to couple and uncouple. I would love to try their newer ones, but I'm getting some reports from some people that they're very hard to get into to convert the cars over to the space necessary. The boxes actually take a little more space, and they're just slightly higher in thickness than the 713s.
And can you repeat what you said? I think you said what the grade was.
It's 3.5, most of it. Actually, just as you go over the curved trestle at the end of the peninsula, it hits 4 for a second.
So any considerations, this is kind of a construction question on building with Nolix. Was there any considerations you took into, versus building one without a Nolix or just a flat layout, that you took into considerations of how you put it together, what you did differently, or some things you wish you learned after the fact that you wish you had done differently?
I could have lessened the grade a little bit, and that would have been the only thing I would do. And what I did is I wanted to be able to get from the doorway to the upper level and not have to put a grade on the climb across the doorway. And that was actually because of what I was using at the time. I wasn't happy with it. I could have easily done it now that I put my aluminum slider in, which will be the next mini clinic here. And, what I did is I measured the length. It turned out that I had the distance. I could do it at 3.5, so I just did it. And that would be the only consideration. On our club layout, the guys had a real hard time grasping just the concept of the Nolix, which I thought was really funny because it turns out on the old layout, we had 3 of them. But we had a helix on the old layout and everybody said, well, let's have a helix on the new layout. So we didn't put any Nolixes in so far. There will be one when we get the narrow gauge in on the new club layout.
I have
All
a
right,
question.
Larry?
I have a question about the Nolix.
Yeah.
It works if you're not doing any switching en route along the grade.
No,
But how do you
yeah.
accommodate level spots so cars don't roll away?
See this thing right here? It's a mini clothespin. And I just cheat. I just have a couple of those out there and they stick them on the track and it holds the train. There is technically no other way to do it. I mean, you can use all the standard techniques. You can uncouple, you can offset a truck so it's on the ground. You can come up with any of multiple little tools that you can stick on the rail. You can stick pins in the ground. You can put the flat weighted end of one of Seth's flagman in the way. There are lots of ways to do it. And
I have the same problem, Lloyd. It's Bill Neal. And what I did was I had to change all my HO cars to have working brakes, and that solved the problem right there. Just kidding, of course.
Yeah. I love it.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions?
Now you want to go ahead and move on to the your slider?
Sure. Let me shrink this down here.
And sliders are not little mini burgers that nobody get.
No, they are not mini burgers at all here. Okay. I got to move it farther over. Oh, come on. Why did you do that? Here we go. Come on. All right. Now, I happen to have a bad back. I had surgery many years ago and they got rid of all of the problems I was having from a nerve standpoint, but they couldn't cure the arthritis and all the rotten parts of my wonderful vertebra. So I don't like ducking and I don't like bending over. And I have so many scars on the top of my head from hitting things that I just insisted we were going to have a way to get across the door easily. And I ran across this structural aluminum. And so here we go. Okay. Behind that ugly face that you're seeing there, and hopefully you're all seeing it.
Yes, we are.
Okay. Is the upper half of the structural aluminum slider. You'll see a tan strip, which is the lower level, and you'll see a yellow and greenish strip, which is the upper level. It slides vertically up and down on a track. The track is actually built right into the slot of the structural aluminum. If you look at the structural aluminum that you're seeing there over on the right side, you'll see a shadowed slot. That's on all 4 sides of the structural aluminum, which is square in cross section and is a brilliant concept in design. And I have no commercial level in this thing. I have it counterweighted, so you can literally do it with one finger. Okay. Can you read all that wording on the side? Is there stuff in the way?
Can see the photo.
Oh, you can't see the words?
Yeah, I can see the words.
Okay, so you probably have your screen too big. If you go to that, I know there's a way to adjust the screen. I can take it back to a smaller screen if it's necessary.
No, go ahead.
Okay, it's for 2 levels. It doesn't care though. I could have 3 levels. I could have 4 levels. You could put a backdrop on it. In fact, if you look up on the upper right, there's a little L bracket fixture that is just floating up there. I forgot to take it off when I took off a backdrop that I had on here. Okay. Single ones are easier, but the parts are all the same. It's literally Tinker Toys. All right, why don't I have access? There we go. Okay, there's a look at the cross section of the structural aluminum. And you see the way it's got the 4 slots, and the way those slots are made is the lips on the slot actually act as a grab for a pin piece that holds the screws that hold everything together. And the blue arrow is pointing at a piece of nylon that is molded to have a, if you look into the slot, you'll see the slider part that's actually in the track. Okay, now, so the blue parts are the vertical parts of the rectangular frame that makes up the slider. The slider actually slides inside 2 tracks, one on the left and one on the right, which are next to the blue arrows. The orange arrow is the cross piece that you'll see for the upper cross, and the green one is looking at the lower level. You can't see it because it's behind the brown facing there on the fascia. Just a word to the wise, if you decide to try any of this, these corner brackets are really the glue. They're what holds the whole thing together. There are other brackets you can get to do other things, but this is what literally holds it together. But there are 2 thicknesses. You'll notice the one on the upper is lower, is about half the thickness of the one on the bottom. And that oval black thing is the part that rides in the slot in the structural aluminum. It's a great gizmo. And you can use them any place you want to do anything you want on the thing. All right, now mine happens to go up over a doorway. And so don't forget to remove the door molding, because you only have the clearance of those brackets and whatever spacers you put behind them for the slider to move up and down. Okay, now this is a close-up look of the bottom cross piece, and where the corner comes together, you'll see the nylon tracking piece. At the bottom, you'll notice is 2 bolts go into a stop at the bottom, and you can literally slam into that thing at full speed, driving the thing, sliding it up or down, and it doesn't care. I used an L bracket right next to that to attach it to the inside of the door frame. And you'll see the head of the 2 Allen bolts that hold the corner bracket in place. And next to it, you'll see a piece of plywood. And you'll notice the plywood is sticking out there. It's cantilevered out. I did that on purpose because I wanted to stick it out as far as I could. I could have put the slider, instead of sliding on the inside, I could have put the slider so it slid on the front, but I didn't want it that way. It still would have worked. Okay. This is looking at the slider and the end of my bench work. And you see it just sits there. This is the opposite side from the one you just saw. But it's totally adjustable. And in fact, I have some space there. You can play with the adjustment all you want. And it just literally bottoms right out. Okay, there's the stops at the upper. And you'll notice there's no L bracket up there because this stuff is structurally so rigid. I just put one at the top of the doorway and one at the bottom, and I didn't need to take it up the extra distance. It just floats up there. There's a pulley here and a counterweight, which is part of what I used for two purposes, which we'll get into. Okay, so here's more detail. That's literally how I attached it. I just used a washer and an Allen bolt and one of those black nuts that slides in the track. Put a slot in it, and that's it. Now there are a couple of things you have to worry about, and that's that your actual track space on your on whatever you're using to hold your roadbed between one side and the other, just make sure the lower one fits inside the upper one so it can slide past it. If you think about that, it'll become obvious. All right. Again, what I did is I used the brackets on the side so I could cantilever out. This is the end of, let's see. This is the upper level. No, this is the lower level. You'll notice I just stuck pieces out here so that when it goes down and it helps any issues on alignment. But in fact, the thing aligns within a 1/16 of an inch and some guide pieces on the sides. If you want to put them in, take care of everything. Here's the opposite end. Just to show you the way I did it. Now you'll notice there's no bolt holding the upper piece on. What I discovered was I didn't actually need it. I have one bolt in the middle that holds this thing in place and it floats. It's actually loose up there. And I have guide pieces that just guide it into place. I didn't need to do that, but I just did it as an experiment to see how well it would trap itself in, and it does just fine. Here you can see how it gets cantilevered out. You need electricity. You can run a cable. I chose contacts so they literally sweep on each other. Just phosphor bronze. Screw in the top, bent, and wire soldered to them going up to the rails. Again, you see that connection there. Now, there's a gizmo, if you've never heard of it, that all of these rails are actually soldered onto. And this is a brief aside here, because this guy makes a great gizmo, and I believe it should be promoted if you're not familiar with it. It's called a Gap Master. And you can't really see it there because it's got so much solder and crap on it, but we'll get to a simple page. And now what I've said is the slop in the nylon is actually just under a 1/16 of an inch. And most of the times it just comes down and it just registers itself just fine. But to make sure that there wasn't any issue at all, I used the pulleys, counterweights, and where I attached them at the top, I put the pulleys in away from the wall. So there was actually a little bit of side pull on it as it goes up and down. So it's always being pulled at the top towards the towards the inside of the layout room and towards the bottom, also towards the inside of the room. It just happens to be the way the tension works on it, and it's great for making sure that even that 1/16 of an inch is never an issue. This guy here is the guy who makes these gap masters. And if you hit control print screen, you'll have a grab of it. This is his website, and those are what they look like. And the ones I'm using are actually not in this picture because I'm actually using a dual gauge version of his on the bottom, and I'm using the one that he shows here is H0N3.
So maybe it was kind of fun. Like they said, they couldn't believe how I got the hands, you know. But other than
Somebody's talking all over me. Whoever it is, please turn your mic off.
Who has COVID?
Thank you. All right, so they were not expensive, and they're just wonderful. They're already clad in copper. They're already gapped. Okay, so here's my pulley, and there's my offset from the wall. It wasn't much. That's all it took. And there's how my pulleys are connected. Again, it's just another hex nut, or excuse me, hex screw. The guys who make this stuff are these guys right here, 80-20.net, excuse me, 8020.net, no spacings at all. They actually have affiliated fabricators around the country that you can get a hold of locally and use their stuff, and will actually contract with you for a price. My slider cost about $220, but that was also like, 6 or 7 years ago. But the stuff's not expensive. You can actually get the parts on Grainger. You just have to make sure that you get the right corner ones. You want to get the ones that are the heavier duty, thicker ones. And if you got any questions, that's my email address, my phone, and the manufacturer's web address.
Lloyd, the only question I see right now is about, do you have any, I saw you had electrical contacts for the putting power to the slider itself, but any preventative from keeping trains running when it's up?
No, if you're dumb enough, you deserve to have your train hit the ground. I operate on my layout. I insist the engineer walks his train, and if there's an issue, he can just grab his engine. Everything on my layout is only 18 inches to 20 inches away. No, it's not like it got lost. And you're across the room, and suddenly somebody forgot to put the gate down or lock it in place. So no, I don't. They do exist. I mean, they're not easy to make. You have to actually put a gap in the track and put a some kind of a switch someplace or a sensor someplace. But it shouldn't take you more than a half an hour to wire it up and make it work. Now, this stuff is all aluminum, so you can tap it, you can drill it, you can screw into it. I took the stuff into my bandsaw and rearranged a piece and cut it off. Cut so clean I didn't even have to sand it to smooth the end that I cut off. I was just tickled to death when I found it. Now there is a guy, and I can't remember his name, that had started to make this stuff and was advertising it many, many years ago. I don't remember who it was, but I don't know if he's still even in business. The only other person I know of that's actually used this stuff is Paul Ldsig. He also is using it as a slider for the doorway, but they make all kinds of stuff. When you go to their website, you'll just see that they make all kinds of display cases and hardware and all kinds of things. And they have hinged doors, other ways to do this. So that's it.
So one other question, Lloyd, any material or lubrication used to help it slide better?
No, it's nylon on aluminum. There's just no friction. And it doesn't weigh hardly anything like if I didn't have the counterweights in there, I would have put a lock on. They do make a lock that slides in the track. And you'd mount it to the track, and when you push it up, it's a lever lock. It just seemed superfluous to me. So, and honestly, when I'm working on the counterweights, like if I take off one of the bridges to do anything, or because it's in the way of something else I'm trying to do, it just sits there. I mean, that's the great advantage of putting in the counterweights. You don't want the counterweights. I don't think they're necessary. You can adjust the tension by pushing the sides in or out a little bit, and so that would make the slider a little more resistant in the track if you were concerned about that. But no, on its own, there's just no tension at all.
All right, great. Anyone else have any other questions for Lloyd?
Lloyd, I think that Jim Betts is using a similar arrangement, and he has a groups.io site,
Okay.
discussion of this material. The groups.io site is, let's see, ENG layout systems at groups.io.
Okay.
And he's got photos of what he's used to build swinging gates and supporting his bench work with.
Yeah, you can use it. You could actually use it to make your bench work. And Jim is probably one of the most creative minds we've got out there in terms of seeing solutions to problems that we didn't know existed.
I have a question about your pier operations.
Yeah.
Since a lot of your traffic goes over there, do you simulate anything like a prototype transload practice for any of the vessels, cargo going between them and loads on your cars?
No, actually, I don't even run the standard gauge part of it. What I do is I'll change the cars so that there's different things being loaded. And so you don't have the same car sitting there all the time. But actually, I don't do anything that relates to the standard gauge stuff. Everything simply comes in to the pier, and then all the car cards are none of them are for the standard gauge. They're all for the narrow gauge, which either gets transloaded into the standard gauge cars in the transfer yard outside the pier building, or it comes off of the ship on into one of those cars and then theoretically goes off somewhere. But I don't write any paperwork up for that because there's no railroad movement going on for those. You could, I mean, I've put a switcher on there and I've moved them. You can get them over so they're at under other industries. I just haven't found the need to do that yet. with 50 spots to work, there's just no need to worry about having the standard gauge get in the way, unless, of course, that's what you're trying to do, is just put a car in the way so you have to blue flag it. Did that answer the question?
Yes. I'm
Okay.
modeling an ocean liner and wondering how I can convey the sense of the transload and the operations that relate to railroad timing and car position. That's all I was. That was
Yeah.
what was
Well,
behind it.
instead of a coastal freighter, use a container ship.
1944.
Okay, well, thank you guys. And I will.
Thanks, Lloyd.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. So we said we'd have some time at the end for just open discussion. One of the things questions I will throw out there, if anybody has any opinions on it, is, as we look at more of these virtual sessions, there is, different types of topics we can do. This one was oriented at looking at how, what individuals did to solve certain problems on their layout, but also, we could do things oriented at layout design and track plan design is what I mean. We can do things about layout construction. And that could have many aspects to it, such as electrical, lighting. So I was curious if there's things out there that people have on their mind that they'd really like to see. If you have something, either put it in the chat box or go ahead and speak up. And if you have a different question other than what I just threw out there, please go ahead. And as long as we don't have everybody jumping on each other, I will just keep it as an open mic, and go ahead and unmute yourself as you have a question. But the floor is open.
Someone may have a question about when is the next LDJ coming? And Byron moved from a 3-story house to a 1-story house earlier this year because of medical problems in his family. So currently his
and you saw the message he sent today, about an hour ago or 2 hours ago.
Well, I think he sent that to the board. I don't know. Did he send it to everybody?
He sent one this morning.
Yeah. And he's indicated that he's looking at early July, once the medical issues die down within his family. So we have to be patient with Byron. I think that he does an excellent job with the LDJ, and unfortunately, some things have cropped up in his life that have delayed production of the LDJ. Any topics that you guys want to have covered?
Travis, is the next issue 71?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
I have a question for the group concerning planning and operation. When you design a yard, especially a complicated large yard, say that's going to handle 10 to 20 trains perhaps in a session, how do you debug the design to make sure that the yard can handle the traffic can flow, and the jobs are interesting? Assume 3 or 4 operators.
Is this a question for the future or a question for now?
If anybody has an answer now, I'll take the advice, but otherwise it could be for the future.
I don't know that I have the answer. I think from personal experience in a club layout, I think a key aspect is don't, there's getting the track plan down and getting the track down and making, one of our presenters mentioned it today earlier, is make sure there's always you want to get scenery, or you want to get ballast down, wait, prove that the track is working the way you want it before you move farther down the layout building aspect. As far as proving it ahead of time, I know one of the things we're doing in our club is, before this track was laid, we sat down as a group and said, okay, how are these cars and trains going to move through this area? But there's people with much more experience than I, but I know those were some of the key things that we have done on that. I'm not sure if anybody else has any comments.
I might offer a thought. This is Bill Neal. What I've seen, I have a moderate sized yard. Doug knows what size it is. It's not a big yard. It handles maybe 8 to 10 trains a session. But one of the things I find is, depending upon who is the yard master, the yard is handled very differently from yard master to yard master. So it's very hard to draw a straight line from your design to success of the yard, because person A will switch it one way and person B another, and it might not work very well for person B or person C, but person A can kick ass in it. So I mean, you got some challenges there. You can always consult a couple of friends and have them sort of sit down and work it in paper, maybe. Bring a train in. How long does it take to classify per car? How long does it take if you're building 20 car trains, how long does it take to actually put one together if you're pulling, classified cars? You're getting a locomotive on, pumping air, putting the caboose on, and the crew's looking over the cars. I mean, you got to kind of look at the time frame for that. One of the things I quickly discovered was the time frame in my head for operating the layout was about half as much time as it actually took the operators to run it. So be careful of that. It's a challenge. That's all I got to add.
Yeah, I'll stick my 2 cents in. This is Lloyd. The size of the yard is totally a function of how many trains you're going to run through it that require switching, and how many industries you're going to have that require car moves. If you're expecting those cars to all come back to the yard, then you got to just take all of your industries, add up all of your car spots, figure out how many tracks that requires you to have, then take all of your trains that are going to come through require switching, and make sure you have space to hold them while they're being serviced, plus all of the cars that you're from your car spots, and then give yourself at least 2 or 3 extra tracks in your yard. And I mean, you won't go wrong then, because depending on what you're dealing with, you can't have more cars in the yard than you have on the layout. You never want to have the yard full. So, if you're thinking, a 7, 8, 9, 10 track yard, give yourself, 4 or 5 extra tracks, because it's entirely possible, if you have a really bad design in your operations, to have every single car in the layout show up at your yard, and invariably more show up than you have room for.
By the way, Doug, I think it's terrific you're building a layout at this point. I'm overjoyed to see that. That's great.
Thanks.
Really, truly.
Yeah.
I think if I remember your basement, though, you're going to be operator constrained, aisle constrained more so than train constrained. But we all face that ugly truth at some point in time. So,
If you raise the aisle up, it won't hit the bellies.
oh, there you go. I like that.
Well,
So Doug,
foot aisle.
some comments on your point, on your question. I'm with the South Oakland Club, and we've got an 1,800 square foot building with a 2-level layout. We've got 2 yards and about 10 switching areas for local freights. The 2 yards, one is Pontiac Yard that has 3 arrival departure tracks and 4 classification tracks and 1 bypass track. There's a double track main next to it that is never used because all of the traffic goes through Pontiac. So Pontiac typically sends out during a session 2 freights, 2 local freights at 10 cars each going to the upper level, which is Railroad West, and 2 to the lower level, which is double track Railroad East. So there's 4 trains that are in motion. And also at the beginning, just for that yard. And then Ferndale Yard, we dispatch an engine and caboose from Pontiac, where the engine terminal is, to Ferndale that doesn't have an engine terminal. So at Ferndale, it only sends to 3 switching locations, Railroad East of there. And there's also switching or 2 switching areas associated with the yard. One is handled as a separate job and one is handled by the Ferndale switcher. And Pontiac also has an industrial area attached to the yard, and that's handled as a job. So we've got all kinds of jobs. Typically, for an operating session, once pre-COVID, we would have 10 to 12 operators, 3 to 4 hour session, and we'd run about a dozen total trains. Only 4 of those trains were manifests. So we'd have 2 manifests in each direction. We had enough capacity in Pontiac to have the trains meet in Pontiac because we had 3 arrival departure tracks. And typically we'd set up at the beginning of the session, we'd have a bunch of locals set up on 1 or 2 of the arrival departure tracks so we could just blast them out at the beginning of the session and not have everybody standing around waiting for the yard to come up with some work for them. So I guess the surprise to me was that we really didn't run very many manifests. And what I'm finding now that I've got to stage the thing is I end up running a couple of manifests in between sessions to make sure that we get all of the cars bailed out that have returned to Pontiac, sent out to staging and come back. So unlike our staging plan where everybody thinks, oh, multiply times 2 and add a couple more tracks, we've got about 6 tracks in each staging yard, but functionally we only have 2 manifests sitting in each staging yard, and then we've got 1 special job that's in one of the staging tracks. So we've actually got excess staging tracks for the manifests. Questions?
Yeah, Tim, that's a nice operation out there. You guys got it figured out pretty well. I think though, what Doug's looking at is he's looking at the eastern end of the full Pennsylvania Railroad and how they shuffle trains around. And I'm a little worried that the volume of trains is going to exceed the volume of operators he's got. That might be a constraint more so than the yard. But the way I'd work it out, to go specifically to Doug's question, would be I'd start using some cards, not car cards, but cards, 305 cards, and putting them into different slots. Say make a the way I designed my staging was I took a 2x4 and cut slots in it for each track in my staging yard. And I had several blocks of 2x4 sitting on my desk, and I was moving 3 or 5 cards back and forth from these blocks of 2x4s to see how the staging yards would react. And you could probably do the same thing for a central operated yard as that, kind of getting the idea how the volume would go. But as far as track arrangements, I think you almost have to think through and envision what the movements would be to see if you got the tracks in position. You have a place for the road engine to sit while you switch out the front of his train or the back of his train. Can you get cabooses on and off the trains with some degree of grace? You know, I mean, those are the kinds of things you gotta kind of work with. Do you have enough classification tracks for all the theoretical classifications your car cards are going to demand on the guys? You know, if you stack classifications in a class track, you're probably going to slow down your yard operations quite a bit. The more you stack them up, the slower it's going to be. So you need more tracks. Well, you know, prototype yards at 64 tracks. Probably not what you're going to do, but you know, I think that all depends on how you build your car cards and how you build your operation up. That's what makes sense anyway. Hopefully that helps.
I'll just add to what Bill was saying there. I've done, instead of using car cards to kind of figure that out, I've actually done it using a spreadsheet with, and just cutting and pasting the cells around. I don't know if that's a good description of exactly how I've done it, but I'm actually fiddling with that right now. So.
Was that Cal speaking?
That was Cal.
That was.
Thank you.
Hey, Doug, maybe you ought to put a little more information in behind this. I mean, how big's your space?
Well, the main room is 20 by 24. The yard is along one 20-foot wall, one 24-foot wall, and then it's sort of J-shaped. It comes out in a 16-foot peninsula. And so tentatively, Traverse and I have thought about having something like maybe three arrival departure tracks. And there are several sub yards, each of which get fed. And my thinking to reduce the need for so many class tracks is to have a fiddle yard, which is adjacent, is a 9 by 16 room that's just fiddling, pre-block cars to go to the pier and the car float, so that only a small incidental amount of traffic needs to be pulled out of the class yard. And then the class yard would work for the three propers around the yard, as well as some industrial branches. And
are you thinking a double-ended yard?
The arrival departure would certainly be, and the classification tracks, depending on space, may be a combination of double and single. Of course, I'd love to have double-ended class tracks.
Well,
but you know,
yeah, no, I'm just trying to figure out how you work a third AD track. I mean, you can't pull anything out down the ladder unless you run past the other trains. I mean, you can do it.
I'm planning on several separate ladders, parallel ladders for the class tracks. So my picture so far has been that the train would arrive, the caboose would be removed, the yard engine couples up behind it. There could be two separate yard switchers. They drag the arrived train back, train lengths yard lead, and then they have class tracks to shove into.
Are you running N scale?
No, this is HO.
In
Train
a 20-foot room, how many corners are you going to go around?
Tentatively 1, 2, 3 corners in a J shape.
Yeah, so basically you're going to have a yard, you're going to have a class yard, then you're going to have a fiddle yard, and essentially nothing to go to on either end.
Well, the fiddle yard is in one of the side rooms,
right?
And then the destinations in the main room going out of the yard. There's several industries, team tracks, and some other things scattered around the outside of the yard that could handle or will be able to handle quite a few cars. And then there'll be some branch lines I haven't spoken about that will either be modeled or staged that each could handle, 2, 10 to 15 car trains.
Yeah,
plus the car float can be a sink that can absorb, depending on the number of floats per session, Traverse thinks 3, that could handle quite a few cars itself. So the idea is to not have my operators go crazy, but also to capture the spirit of the pacing of World War II operations at a busy port of embarkation. So that's the background.
Doug, how many classifications do you envision the shifters having to do?
Say that again.
How many different destinations? You'd have inbound cars on your inbound track. And then how many classifications would you be sorting out? You'd have stuff going on floats. You'd have stuff going back west out of the mixture. I mean, don't think of a specific train. Think of all the trains that come in, they're going to handle. What are the different classifications you're going to have? You're going to have several eastbound destination type classifications. You're going to have a lot of westbound, stuff going to New York, stuff going to Philadelphia, stuff going to wherever, but you can try to simplify that, I think. But how many eastbound classifications, how many overall classifications do you see being involved with what you're operating? Do you have a perspective on that yet?
Well, I'm trying to model too many trains coming in and out, but one of the ideas is that with a fiddler, if the cars are blocked, relatively speaking, like for the separate proppers or the float yards or some of the others, the cars might come into the stub yard and then, pass through it relatively quickly with less blocking going on in the classification yard itself.
I pretty much expect that. It's not going to be a car by car sort. It's going to be shoving blocks of cars in your class. I'm just wondering how many class tracks you're thinking, how many true classifications you've got on deck here.
Well, is he putting crossovers on his class tracks so he can actually put, 3-4 different classifications on the same line?
Yeah, Lloyd, that's a good question. I would recommend he not do that, but that's an alternative to using a fewer tracks.
Yeah, I mean, most yards that I see are straight, are non sliced tracks. Yeah, and so you're dealing with no more than 2 classes per track
at most.
Yeah,
maybe 1.
Well, yeah.
Well,
if he's expecting the kind of volume of trains through there, he's probably going to have 1 classification per track, and unless there's a really odd situation, he's got to sort out some priority cars or something like that. Just wondering, I'm wondering, Doug, if you've thought through how many classifications you've got at that yard.
So Doug and Bill, I think I can help on this a little bit, and that is, since this is apparently going to be the eastbound point of material going to World War II, when you've got westbounds coming into that yard, that would go on 1 classification to go somewhere else to be classified to go somewhere.
That's a good point, Tim.
Mess around with trying to classify it by, is it Philadelphia or Connecticut? It's like, no, it's out of here.
Excellent.
And let somebody else sort it out, because
you're right. That's good. That's a good point, Tim. Thank you. Yeah. It's just the eastbound stuff he's got to sort, maybe by pier or something like that.
Well, I'm fortunate that the prototype had just west of the yard I'm modeling, it had a flat classification yard, and then a few miles further, it had the major hump yard. So my notion is westbound trains, if they're modeled, would be junk trains.
Yeah.
With the possible exception of some, special handling cars or something, but generally they could go out. The other possibility is that I have a hole connecting the 2 rooms, and I'm now thinking that maybe I'm only modeling the, some of the traffic, and that the arrival departure tracks are really more like set out tracks.
So I'm kind of working on the same kind of time period, but I'm on the west, I'm on the middle of the country in Texas. So I'm not dealing with a port scenario, but I do know that World War II ports had staging areas for the material to organize it by shipload. So one of the big burdens was they couldn't flood the port with material because if they did, it'd turn into chaos and they wouldn't be able to sort it out. So they'd have
well, it's worse than
outside of the port area where the material would be staged, and then they would swarm in there when the ship docked, and the stuff would arrive just in time. So you're likely to have blocks come in for specific ships all in a rush as part of your daily work.
Yeah.
On top of that, Tim, when they head to the dock, And I used to work at the docks for several years. And the problem is you have to have the entire ship manifest has to be organized by loading schedule. And so you need a yard to do nothing to just do that, because you have to rearrange everything coming in that went off onto that train into exactly the right order. All the tanks and the heavy shit, they come in first. They got to go
First, yeah.
they got to go to the bottom of the well. And so you can't just take a train that's going to a ship and just deliver it. They
Oh,
can't. They don't have a clue what to do with it.
I'm a little bit more sophisticated than that, because not only that, but the cars have spot locations and spot times, and there's a quick turnaround first session or first shift, quicker shift.
Hang on. Hey, Mark, would you turn off your mic? Mark, turn off your mic. Thank you.
Yeah, so I am interested in learning more about the material. I've had some coaching, about that. I'm only modeling one of several different piers in that yard, so that the blocking would be from there. But I'm also anticipating that because of industries in the metropolitan area or on one or two of the nearby branches, that not all the carloads going to the ship would come in a solid train from a supply depot, that there'd be some mix. Plus, one of the interesting things I hope to capture, and one of the things that I have to struggle with in terms of sophistication, is that ships were not only loaded with the materiel from the military, but they also were carrying out the Lend-Lease program, which was a civilian program of reconstruction and other kinds of stuff that went into the open spaces left by the military stuff, which cubed out but didn't weigh out. And there was a pressure on the manifest manager to fill up each ship, both space-wise and weight-wise, because they didn't want to waste any of the opportunities. And I'm hoping to blend those two together and do all of this match to the hatch numbers. That's my equivalent of spot numbers. So the spots have hatch numbers and times and dwell times, which is why I was asking earlier about the dwell times. And I have a separate classification yard to do what I call trimming.
Oh, that's great.
So if I can just come in, I know nothing about all these yards, but they sound fantastic. But your staging yard, it might be worth giving. It sounds like you're constrained on space, even though it's in another room, to think about just doing that as a traverser to save you the ladder that you would need to get into it, and just build all the bench work in there on wheels and make the whole thing move forwards and backwards in some runners, which can just be timber or lumber on the floor. That's what we do in Europe, and it saves a ton of space, because you're going to need loads and you're going to need as much space in that staging yard as possible.
That's a
And,
great point.
I know you mentioned that you wanted to do it as a fiddle yard, but if you do it as active staging, where people are lobbing things on and off tracks all through the op session, it can get a bit difficult. So a traverser saves you. Usually it gives you an extra sort of 35 to 40% of space, because you remove the yard ladder. And that gives you loads more space, and it also saves a fortune in turnouts. So something to consider.
Gordy's making a great point.
Yeah, all those trolleys.
Well, you got that structural aluminum stuff working for you.
One of the issues is if you're thinking about the equivalent of 3 or 4 through freights and some transfer runs and some of these branch lines coming all in, I don't have the space even in the fiddle yard to host the transfer table, because I want to run more trains than a transfer table can have. So those are just some of the trade-offs, but Travis and I have talked about having one drawer with a consist per train to simplify the decision-making of the real-time decision-making of the fiddler.
Well, Doug, if it's that tight, I'd look at that that tracking we've looked at tonight, and I'd just make a vertical staging yard with multiple decks in it that slide up and down. It's been done quite a few times. because the space above and below, you're not using it. So you can always make a staging yard vertical and just make the thing move up and down. That as many decks as you can squeeze in there, doubles the capacity each time.
Picture the counterweights on that thing. It's a good idea, though. I like it. I
Well,
like that idea.
you don't have to have a counterweight. What you can do is you can have two elevators with cars offset on pulleys. So when one's going up, the other one's going down, and you don't have to. Yeah.
That's not a bad idea. I kind of like that.
Yeah.
I mean, you should look at the product that was produced in the UK called the Nevelator, which was a vertical staging yard that went around, and it was the space of two side-by-side tracks, and the thing moves around. I can't think what the elevator system's called. They used to have elevators that constantly moved. It was like that.
I see. It's like a Gatling gun, almost.
Almost, yeah.
Yeah. I remember that. And that seemed like a really good idea. Hey, Doug, how long are your trains? How long are you planning to have your trains?
Hopefully they're going to be somewhere between 18 and 20 cars.
These are all 40-foot cars at your era.
Yeah, so you're talking 20 to 25 feet?
No, it'd be shorter than that.
It's 11 to say 10 to 12 feet would be the train length.
So if you had a 12-foot elevator, that would do the trick for you.
But certainly in terms of the length to hold the trains, the question becomes how many trains. And one of the topics for a future discussion like this one is how do you design an active staging yard to help the mole manage the job without going crazy, and still to be able to do interesting things like Craig Wilson did on Atlantic Great Eastern Times. Because some people like the mole job, some people don't, and I want to design a mole job that attracts the most number of people, so I'm not dependent on one person.
Then you should only allow them to do one train and then take them out of the room to something else, and then send them back. Rotate them. I mean, that way you'll get everybody involved and nobody will go nuts.
Well, I'll have lots of people involved in a lot of things, but certainly some rotation. Now, there's a fellow in Minneapolis whose last name I can never pronounce. His first name is Will Tinopoulos or something. And he operates a passenger theme railroad about going through Toledo Station. And in order to give more people things to do and so on, he has each of the passenger train operators assemble the train they're going to be running and take it apart after they've run through the terminal, because the Union switcher would be the one that does mid-switch. And he says that operation has gone pretty well. So that's another possibility, is to have the mainline crew, handle, some of the additional blocking or something to spread out the workload so not everything falls on one fiddler.
I might add one more balancing comment. And Doug, take this. You and I have been friends for years, so don't take this as an insult by any means. But I personally was absolutely shocked on my railroad how few trains that I had envisioned actually got run during an operating session. I had envisioned 30 trains and maybe we ran 12. And it was shocking to me how much time was taken in the yard and on the main line and moving across interlocking plants and that sort of thing. And for people to get the operators to get organized, look at the train sheets, read all that stuff, look at their car cards, all that kind of stuff gets factored in there. And it really slowed things down much more so than I expected. So that was an interesting aspect of operations that I had not anticipated when I was at your stage, just kind of building the layout. So
well, I want to mention for the people listening in that I have the highest respect in the world for Bill. He's one of my all-time favorite people.
Thanks, Doug.
And he's been repeating this advice on several different occasions, including updates about how he's managed staging and fiddling. And I've seen photographs of his fiddle yard and the drawers underneath and so on. And he's told me about how surprised he's been. What I don't know how to crank into that is that I have no essentially run time between the fiddle yard and the terminal.
Yeah,
which would shorten things. Plus,
trains be in and out pretty quick. Yeah,
they'll move in pretty quick. Also, they'll be in multi-car blocks. Not every car will move, in a block.
Yeah, but the physical reality is it takes 3 minutes to 4 minutes to move a car. I mean, to pull it, if you're working in an industry or you're working any place on the outside, I mean, even in the yard, if you're operating at a prototypical speed, it can take you 3 minutes to pull one car off, pull the string down, shove the car in, cut it back off, put the string onto the next track. I mean, so
That's very helpful kind of information. I know the
And
gold
Lloyd's
Travers had of
pretty
having,
accurate on that also, because I find that we send a guy out to drop off 10 cars at one of these local spots at South Oakland Club and pick up 10. So they're handling 20 cars.
right.
An hour and a half later, they've got it done.
And that's just about right.
yeah, well, one of the things that I'm trying to do is to look at the different trains and the time I expect them to operate and compare it with a 3-hour operating session and see how few trains I can fit in when trains, are tied up for an hour and a half or 45-minute or 20-minute time slots. Because I think that it is a shock.
Your yard operation is very much real time. So, if you're just running them across a main line somewhere, you can run at a really accelerated pace in terms of a fast clock. But the yard is a quagmire.
Well, and my goal is to minimize the quagmire so the operators want to come back.
Then
Oh,
you
no,
need,
they
then you need
want,
additional leads to make sure you can handle, you mentioned sub yards, so you need leads so you can have extra switchers working the same yard.
That's part of the plan. There might be as many as 2 switchers for the ship pier, 2 for the car float yard, and then 2 other classification switchers probably working, plus switchers working the proppers adjacent to the yard. The aisle congestion is a concern because I've only allowed 4-foot aisles. And I know that yards crowd up and people have to look at cards and stuff like that. So I have to give a lot of thought to how do I stagger the positions, the timing of this kind of stuff so that everything is comfortable.
Only invite skinny people, Doug.
Yeah, I may have to offer gym membership.
Can I make a comment?
Sure.
My name is Robert Fry. I'm new to you guys, but I'm a member of the WISE division. And the WISE division had TrainFest 220, but they didn't have it. They had a Zoom meeting. Remember? What the TrainFest in Milwaukee area was not held for the last 2 years, but now it's coming back. But at TrainFest 220, they had a Zoom meeting. And at the Zoom meeting, we talked about some of this stuff too. And I put out on YouTube is a result from that thing we had at 220. And it's about JMR operation using key codes. Now, in the Milwaukee area, we really like the JMRI operations. And what you're talking about is really what it does for you. It gives you all this information about when you move the car and the car, how long it takes. All this stuff is all calculated for you. Now, the only thing about using JMRI with the key code, the clinic was about just not the operation, but the fact that in JMRI you had to have a unique car number. And because of the fact I like to buy a bunch of cars and they all got the same number. And because they had the same number, I put on a key code to make it unique. And then where I could then take and operate with many, many cars with the same number. Now, with this thing was about we use JMR operation, and I'll give you an example. It's not in that case; it is a case of just using JMRI. In my case, I have 18 trains ready to run in the railroad. It takes 4 people to operate it, but I'll also allow 2 of the people to go along with the guy to operate with them. I got 3 yards, and that takes 3 people. That's 3 plus 4 plus 2, that is the number of operators.
So Robert, you use two-man crews on your freights?
On the freights,
Yeah.
the thing is, with 18 trains and JMRI, I know these trains will work because the cars have to have a space to go to. So when you was a JMRI, to run a train, you had to go from one point to the other point, dropping off and picking up cars. And when you do that, you will get to the fact that it has to have a space for the car to start, to stay, to pull, and end the point. In my case, when people come, I'm ready to run 18 trains, period.
Robert, I think Doug's primary concern is not space for the trains, but will his yard function efficiently enough to turn the trains through it? Yeah, but that's interesting. I like that.
You just try to use the JMRI. You do what you have, and see how long it'll come out and tell you all this stuff, and it comes up with the numbers for you.
One of the things that I'm
Well, the TrainFest 220 was a Zoom meeting. They had clinics, and one of the clinics was by JMRI using key codes. Now, the key code was really Rob Proctor's layout. And the key code idea was just not the operation. It was the fact that I wanted to use the same car number because I didn't want to take and put all those numbers that have cars and trying to put on a different number. So I just put on a key code. Under that case, then I could take cars that have the same number and just put on two letters.
Yeah.
And
Hey, Robert.
Yes, please.
Would you tell us what a key code is?
If you go to the program, it's just JMRI operations with the two letters on it. B for a boxcar, and it's got boxcar A, B, C, but there's another boxcar has the same exact number. So a key code is just taking a whole bunch of boxcars that I bought. They all have the same number, and I just put a key code on it. So it forces that the JMRI still works.
Slow down. How does an operator looking at the boxcar know what the key code is? All I can see
is on the front of the boxcar, both ends.
What? It's
I
stuck
just
on the
cover
front
up the number at the front end.
It's something you stick on the boxcar.
Yes,
It's non-prototypical.
it's just two letters. B for box and box A, box B, box C.
It's not something I would want to do, but that's interesting.
Well,
Thank
but
you.
the point is, it worked. Is that I didn't have to change the number, and I just put the circle on, and we were playing trains, and I could set up 18 trains with those people, and it generally took about 4 hours to run 18 trains with 3 yards.
So what did you make the numbers out of, or the letters for your?
Oh, I just you put them on a computer, and you put the letter B and better. It has to be a box is a capital B and a small A through the, and then the fact that you just take a punch and punch out the letter, and there's a circle, and you put the circle on the end of the car.
You're gluing it. You're gluing it on the end of the car.
Yeah, with a river cement.
Okay.
I know the point is, yes, they do look a little funny, but the operators love it because it's so easy.
Well, the approach I'm taking might be even easier in work, which is if you have 2 cars with the same car number, it doesn't matter where you put them as long as they go to the destination.
Well, but the code makes it unique. That means that car has to go to a certain place.
But he doesn't.
Number, but it's got to have a.
Yeah.
So
what he just told you is he doesn't care.
No, we do care. You have
no,
to put the
he
car
doesn't
number in
care.
the right place.
Not you don't care. He doesn't care.
Oh, all right.
We're discussing Doug's problem, not yours, Rob.
Okay.
Well, I'm open to hearing other people's solutions.
Yeah, I
anyway,
understand.
it's on
comment.
YouTube. It's on YouTube if you want to look at it. And it's
I've got
really
a comment.
most of us in the Milwaukee area use JMRI. I think that's the main comment, and that does everything you talked about in terms of the thing about it is that you have to have a space for every car to go to, the locomotive, everything must work. and I have planned out 18, and I know it will work because the MRI has figured out all the combinations. So that's what we use. Thank you.
Doug, is the layout already built?
We've had 90 operating sessions, but many people got electrocuted by the high voltage catenary. So I haven't decided what to do next. No, the layout is not built. I'm as far
Okay,
as.
can I suggest JMRI might be a way to test your design. It might take a little work, but you could determine how to lay out your yards and your car spacing in a way that would make it work. And you don't have to actually use your models and put numbers on them. You can just have simulated freight cars with each having a separate number. The whole object of the exercise is to figure out if your design is going to work. I think JMRI is, say again?
Are there tutorials for people who are not very sophisticated about computers and programming?
Oh yeah.
There is a tutorial, but better than that, we've got Ken on the call and you can just tap him forever.
Yeah, this organization that's our goal, right?
Yeah.
Layout design.
Yeah. I'm modeling Jersey City, the Harsimus Cove yard. The prototype is 2,700 cars, and I'm trying to shrink it down by a factor of 20.
Well, right, but by creating a simulation of your layout and testing your ideas on how big the yard should be, you don't have to lay track or commit yourself until you know you got what you want. And I'm suggesting that I'm not one of the people, but there are people who can show you how to do that in this organization.
Well, I'd like to learn who they are.
Just a suggestion.
I have
Well,
a
Doug,
comment.
one of the things that
Hello?
come up on,
I've got a comment.
things that may come up on the design is, if you probably already know how many cars your yard will hold, and I would suggest to you that the amount of cars you can process is less than the full amount of capacity you have, because if you've only got one slot left in the yard, you'll never be able to shift it and organize it. So you need you need almost twice as much space in your yard as the number of cars that are going to be in there.
Well, the recommendation is you don't want to have your tracks more than 50 to 70% full, or the yard can slow down. In my case, it's somewhat worse than that, because when you pull cars off a pier, you have to be ready to put other cars in their place, soon thereafter, because they're on an adjacent track, and you can't hold up the loading of the ship by the time it takes to do other kinds of classifications.
Mhm.
And, so I'm aware of that, needing the extra track, capacity. And that's another thing to figure out how to handle, and I don't know whether JMRI can just crank in the 70 or 50% capacity. But I don't know if JMRI, maybe people still on can answer this, handle timing, not just destination space. So 3 different cars might be destined to the same pier every hour and a half. So it's not something that one person handles one car per spot per session. And the timing can matter. And so those are all the combination effects. And that's what I'm trying to forecast in a pragmatic way.
Well, what I did, my layout was built a section at a time. So now I have 11 yards. 3 of them are sorting yards. The others are more industrial yards that supports an industry, sorting for the industry. So I try to offload the work to the local jobs as much as I can. So the other thing that I did was I operated every job multiple times. So I knew how long it would take with kind of different numbers of cars. I came to designing my jobs to have 10 to 15 spots to be spotted. Not that necessarily they're all going to be spotted in a particular session, but that seems to be enough to make a job that it takes about 10, 20 minutes minimum to switch all your cars and make your pulls, and you'd be arriving back at the yard. So you would have an idea of how many sort jobs, if you will, are going to come into the yard. On my big Ashland Avenue yard, I have one guy doing sorting into individual trains. I have another guy that sorts to the interchange tracks, and a guy who spends half his time at the 26th Street yard, which isn't as busy, but he operates the far end of the interchange track yard to shove cuts of cars at the direction of the interchange yard operator, cuts of cars to come up, and that's going to be the next round that gets sorted by the sorter, and cars go to the next destination. So I kind of did it by experience. You know, I did all the switch jobs. If a job had too much work, I took some of it away from that job and gave it to another job. Like my brewery and paper job, those are two separate jobs. If I have enough people, it works okay to have that as two separate jobs, even though the paper job only has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 locations to switch. But the harder thing for the paper job is he really doesn't have his own runaround track. So he's got to work with the little local yard to get cars placed in front of him and behind them, depending on if they're facing point or trailing point moves. The brewery has a small runaround and he can do whatever he needs to do back there. But that's how I did it, by experience. And I would suggest you run your local switch jobs, see how long it takes to run them, see if you got a good number of spots, not too many, not too few, to have them so you can schedule almost the time that they're going to be coming into the yard. And then I was able to figure out when the trains are going to be coming in and when they're going to be going out.
Well, I think there's a lot of wisdom in what you're saying. The issue for me is that I want to not build any more tracks than I have to, but build enough to have it flow smoothly. And
Right.
of course, I'd be testing it out after it was built to debug it and cut back on trains, or, be pragmatic about it. But I'm trying to avoid making mistakes that other people have made in their yard designs.
Yeah, I have 10 tracks in my Ashland Avenue sorting yard. And I have one track goes to 26th Street yard. One track goes to the Ldsig yard. There's one track for the Belt Railway of Chicago, which generates a lot of cars. And then there's the pink and purple, the brewery and paper job, go to one track. Ldsig gets its own track. And then there's a couple other switch jobs. You have the Roby Street yard. That's one track, because that has a lot of activity because it's got a car float. And then there's Central Manufacturing District has a track, Harvester has a track, and so does the Loomis Street yard job, which has a few industries. So that way I have 2 more tracks than I have sorts. So what I do, one track gets used for what comes in, you pull off of that, and anything that's going to go to the interchange yard, you got a place to put it temporarily. And then the other track, which was the bottom runner on the track, I use that as an overflow for any of the other colors if somebody hasn't come in to grab their train soon enough. So I essentially have a floating track that's good for 2 tracks.
Yeah. That's a couple of good ideas in there.
Hey, guys, just an obvious point here. This is not an OPSIG Zoom. And for the last 40, maybe 50 minutes, all we've been doing is talking ops. And I realize it relates to how much track you have to lay, but you haven't got your ops part of it under control yet. You can't answer the questions, so you don't know what you can do. So, I mean, you literally have to sit down and do all your paperwork. It's a time consuming pain in the ass, has nothing to do that's fun, but without it, you'll never get to the answer.
And I think way to get started on it is to start with the endpoint on where the cars end up. So let's start with the wharf. So a typical wharf would have 4 tracks on the wharf ship side. And, an average Liberty ship was 450 feet long, but there'd be 4 holds and about 300 feet useful for being able to transfer loads. So what can you put on the wharf on those 2, on the 2 tracks that are next to the ship? You can put 10, 12 cars, and you need to sort them out somewhere else. So, but start with the wharf and work your way back on, okay, what do I have to do to get the loads organized at the wharf? And where do I do that? Because you want to do all of that on land somewhere. And if it's just sorting for a couple of piers, you probably want that near the pier, but not on the pier. And in your main yard, you just want to organize to go to that pier, not to go, you may not be able to do it by hold number in your yard.
Well, we have gone past 6:30 Eastern time now. This is a great conversation. I don't think we'll get the final answer here. I will keep the room open, but I did want to formally close the session and stop the recording. But I will keep the room open for a while for people who want to discuss more. But I appreciate, first of all, I wanted to thank Lloyd and Rick for their presentations today, and then for all the feedback from everybody else. So thank you very much. And I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording and formally end this session, but I will, like I said, keep the room open for a little bit.
Okay, good job, guys. Lots of good discussion.
I'd like to thank everybody for their patience and their wisdom.